I want to talk about Bitcoin as a form of Satyagraha, in part because it is related to why Rahul and I are involved with ZebPay now and what we're trying to do in transforming ZebPay into more of a social enterprise, using the blockchain, mutualizing the company so that all of the customers become co-owners, so that ZebPay will no longer be, it won't be owned by just a few large shareholders. Instead, it will be held as a common trust on the blockchain. All these ideas go back to a peculiar story of me and Rahul Pagidipati, our CEO, which I will just tell the brief version of. So 20 years ago, I was teaching at the University of Florida, and I taught a class on writing and nonviolent conflict resolution. I had grown up hearing stories of Gandhiji because some in my family had known him, and also Rajaji, and done their small part. And I had a wonderful student who was fascinated by all the stuff we talked about Gandhi, and that was Rahul. He was 18 or 19 at the time. And then one day he very quietly told me that his grandfather had been a freedom fighter, and he also had grown up with stories about Gandhi. And his father had come from very poor circumstances in a village, was the first in his family to go to complete school, complete college, go to Harvard, start becoming a healthcare entrepreneur, building values-based companies with billion-dollar valuations, and then creating finally a family company that has decided to donate back 90% of the entire company's holdings to charity at the end. And all of this relates back to the stories we grew up with about this man. So I wanted to share, I'll use the Salt March, which you see a photo of, as kind of an explanation of a few of the features of Satyagraha, because while it's a well-known story, I think sometimes the story is not as well known as we might think, and certain aspects of it get overlooked. It's kind of fashionable now to say that it was more symbolic, or that you need to have really some violence backing up the nonviolence. These things are not true, and I'll try to make the case for why I think so. There are two numbers that I want to share with you and ask you to keep in mind. If you remember nothing else about the talk, remember these two numbers. The first is the number 2, or 2 times, and that is because studies of revolutions that occurred in the 20th century, which was the bloodiest century in human history, showed that nonviolent revolutions succeeded twice as often as violent revolutions in the 20th century. So it's not just what Gandhiji did in India, it's the legacy, the lessons, the blueprint he laid down for revolutions in South Africa, Ukraine, Czech Republic, Poland, Chile, the Philippines, dozens of places, revolutions that had even colorful names, literally colorful names. The Orange Revolution in Ukraine, the Yellow Revolution. In Estonia, there was the Singing Revolution, which is a great story in itself. So the evidence is clear. This is backed by data. If you want to have a revolution, you're twice as likely to win if you make it nonviolent. So with that, I'll just start to explain a few of the key features of Satyagraha and why those features appeared in the Salt March, also appear in the emergence of Bitcoin. So the first thing you have to do in Satyagraha is state the problem. And Gandhiji did state the problem. It's a very simple problem. India is surrounded by an ocean, a salty ocean that's named after India, and yet we're not allowed to make our own salt. So the problem wasn't just that the British wouldn't allow Indians to make the salt. It was that Indians complied with this request, which is a huge problem in itself. The complicity of Indians in this kind of treatment was as much a problem to be solved as the brutality or inhumanity of the British Empire. Now, using salt as a method was not considered to be a very smart thing. Most people kind of just ridiculed it. A newspaper called The Statesman said, thinking Indians will find this laughable. Even Nehru and Patel had a hard time understanding why Gandhi would choose this. Although that was before. But as the march started, Nehru suddenly seemed to get it. And after the march, Motilal Nehru, Pandit Nehru's father, said, the only wonder is that no one else ever thought of this. So Gandhi knew history. He didn't just choose salt as a random thing. The French Revolution was partly because of a similar salt tax imposed by the French king on the French people. And Roman soldiers would rebel several times in the history of the Roman Empire if they weren't paid their salt, because Roman soldiers were paid partly in cash and partly in salt. In fact, the word salary comes from the word salt. And the word soldier comes from saldare, meaning one who is given salt. So Gandhi studied this. He knew salt had worked before. So, and it would work again. Second thing you have to do in Satyagraha is force the system to show its flaws. When you do this, you put the other side in a dilemma that's pretty much inescapable. If you arrest the protesters, you make them martyrs. If you don't arrest them and let them carry on, you admit that your law probably should never have been law in the first place. And you basically have to admit that your system is broken. This is what the Salt March did. It forced the British government to admit that their system had flaws, serious flaws, and was probably broken. The third thing you have to do is lower the barrier for people to join. Gandhiji made it easy for ordinary people to join in the movement. These are women carrying jars of seawater to go and boil it to make their own salt. It's low cost, it's easy, anybody with access to the ocean can do it. So lowering the barrier for people to join in is one key feature of a nonviolent resistance. The last key feature is that you give people ways to take action and to be in control. One of the things that happens when you're feeling oppressed by any system is you feel helpless. Restoring a feeling that you're not helpless is key. Now, the women who are spinning here, as you can see, some of them don't even have much fancy cloth of their own. And yet they're sitting with their spinning wheels in front of textile mills owners in Ahmedabad. Those mill owners stood to lose a lot of business because of this protest. And yet, in the end, they switched. They began donating money to Gandhiji. They began making qadar, and they joined in the movement in their own way. So, and it was largely because of ordinary people like this who took action and were guided in taking action by the simple instructions of Gandhiji and the movement. Now, spinning also is seen as kind of arbitrary. Sometimes people forget the exact reason why spinning was chosen. There were a number of them. One was it was a way to decentralize control of the means of production, something that we all can relate to in the blockchain world. But it was also an answer to a very violent theft that had occurred in the previous century. The British textile industry began with Indian looms from Bengal that were disassembled, taken to Great Britain, reassembled, and then hooked up to steam engines. It was Indian designs that were first used in the textile mills of Lancashire, of Manchester, Leeds, the great mill towns of England. And many of those weavers in India, in Bengal in particular, were stopped from making their own cloth. Some of them even, the story goes, had their thumbs cut off so they could no longer work. So it was a great injustice, and spinning was a way of rectifying that injustice, or at least showing we won't let it stand. We will do something. We will take action, and that action will be creative and not just destructive. So what about Bitcoin? Well, the Genesis block, the very first block of the Bitcoin blockchain, stated the problem very clearly. This headline, the chances are on brink of second bailout for banks. It stated that also in the white paper that fraud was an inherent fact of the system. And the system required us to accept a certain amount of it. We have to accept fraud and criminality in our system, at least in the current system. Now, inflation and corruption are things that everybody could relate to. And in 2008 and 2009, people could relate to it so much that Satoshi Nakamoto didn't have to force the system to show its flaws. The system was just showing its flaws in every headline. Lehman Brothers collapsing, all sorts of headlines like Day of Reckoning on Wall Street, market crash shakes world, markets routed in global sell-off, and so on. Now, part of Satyagraha is to challenge the system to present a solution. So he was trying to, Satoshi Nakamoto knew that the system was being challenged by all sorts of people around the world to offer a better solution to runaway inflation, to offer trusted third parties when it seemed like trust was evaporating. Nobody could be trusted. And to offer accountability. But there is no accountability as immutable as the blockchain. And there aren't trusted third parties that are as trustworthy as a system of public and private keys. Now, the case is still to be made. The education is still happening. But that is the case that Bitcoin offers to the world. Third thing, lower the barrier for people to join. Satoshi Nakamoto did that as well by making it open source, by making it easy to run on pretty much any computer. So anybody can join in and be part of the blockchain. And it gives people a way to take action. It gives people a way to have true custody, true control of their wealth. Prashant, you can still hear me, right? I'm looking at my screen that I'm sharing. I just want to make sure.
Yes, we can still hear you.
Okay, good. I'll continue. So Satyagraha comes, as you may know, from the combination of two words, truth and agraha, which means to hold firmly. Sort of like the way Gandhiji is gripping his staff there. It means holding to the truth and not letting go. It means relentlessly doing so, repeatedly shining the light on the truth until it can't be ignored. Now, the Salt March repeatedly showed certain truths, and I'll just list them really quickly. These are people, again, making salt by boiling seawater. It's the simplest act. It just requires fire, water, and a pot. But the truth it's exposing, this system requires you to gain wealth by taking money from human beings who are in their bodies 75% salt water. For the salt, they need to stay alive. So the truth is, a tax on being human is inhuman, and yet you're doing it. Truth. To maintain this system, you have to use violence and find ways like racism and religious bigotry to justify wrongdoing. Truth. By picking up this salt from the beach, I'm breaking your law and declaring my right to be a human being without anyone's permission. Truth. Even your people, the British people, don't support this system. Truth. Meanwhile, the Indian people are uniting to prove ordinary women and men can overthrow empires without violence by working together. Truth. You are in a lose-lose situation and your broken system cannot fix itself. It can only be fixed by being replaced. And every day, more people agree. This is Gandhiji. He wrote, I want world sympathy in this battle of right against might. And he was getting it day by day by continually telling this same story over and over, sticking and holding firmly to the truth. Truth. Your system requires you to be inhuman and treat us as subhuman. We refuse to cooperate any longer, and deep down you want to refuse too. Now, people forget sometimes the brutality that was happening in this context. But forgive this graphic image, but this is what happened in 1943, which is very recent. The Bengal Famine, which in 1998, Amartya Sen, an Indo-British economist, won the Nobel Prize for proving that not just this famine, but all famines in recent history, in modern times, have not been caused by a lack of food. They've been caused by a lack of access to democratic institutions. by a lack of access to the ability to speak out and demand that your government not take away food from you. But this is the context in which Indians had to deal. Winston Churchill himself withheld famine relief, and he said it would do no good because, quote, Indians breed like rabbits. Churchill had deep contempt for Indians. He called Indians a beastly people with a beastly religion. So, and yet, in the end, Gandhi won. And that's something people keep forgetting, I think. He won. Now, Bitcoin also holds firm to certain truths and shines a light on certain truths that were in the air in 2008, but I think if we don't keep looking back at them, it's easy to forget them because it's not often stated in plain words. But here's one truth. You can't create economic growth by printing money and hoping or pretending that corporations will do the right thing with it. You need trustless systems. You can't trust necessarily that this will happen. Truth. You create profitable bubbles for the 1% with systems like this, and inflation for the poor and middle class. You can see how all the financial engineering that led to subprime mortgages and the financial crash, all of this was done legally. Truth. Poverty is man-made, and inflation is a tax you pay for being poor or middle class. Now, see, the thing is, activists will shout this and they'll wave signs about it. But the genius of Bitcoin is it actually offers a way out. Gandhiji offered a way out. He didn't just complain. Bitcoin offers a way out. It doesn't just complain. And that's the reason why it marks an important milestone in human progress. Here's another bit of truths, I guess. I showed you a picture of the Bengal famine. Instead of famine now, we've gone from hunger to obesity, and we've gone from famine directly to, particularly in poorer countries and poorer regions of rich countries. We've gone from famine to fast food and food deserts. A food desert is a place, in the US you have this a lot, inner cities and rural areas where there is no shop selling fresh vegetables or fresh food. Instead, it looks like this. Everything is processed food. And so you get a lack of vitamins, you get all sorts of malnutrition. And the price of these things continues to go up with inflation. But the truth is, this is not a natural situation. It doesn't have to be this way. It is engineered to be this way. The price of healthy food can and should be affordable and about the same for your entire life. We've grown up a few generations now where this has not been the case, but 200 years ago, 300 years ago, the price of a bag of rice or a loaf of bread did not change between the age of 20 and the age of 60. It was just pretty much the same as it always was. This is a quote from a great book called The Bitcoin Standard. In a world where central banks allocate credit, the larger firm has an advantage in being able to secure funding at a lower rate. This helps explain why large-scale food producers proliferate so widely around the world, as their lower interest rates allow them higher margins. The triumph of bland, mass-produced junk food cannot be understood outside the great benefits that large-scale affords to producers. The manipulation of interest rates, the manipulation of rates between currencies is the hidden engine that allows a lot of this to happen. And that's something that, because it's hidden, we don't often realize that it's happening in plain sight. But here's one truth that the Bitcoin it rests on, which is that the soundest money, the hardest money, wins. Bitcoin, by having absolute scarcity, 21 million and not one Bitcoin more than that ever, is sound. It is inflation proof. It's designed not to be inflatable. This is a silver 1 rupee coin, and it comes from a pivotal year in Indian history, 1911, when the great Delhi Darbar happened. King George V came to claim his title as Emperor of India. It was also the moment when the Indian economy began to seriously collapse almost. And it happened in large part because during the previous century, the 19th century, while Great Britain was on the gold standard, they kept India on a silver standard. The price of gold remained stable or went up. The value of silver kept going down. And so inevitably, India's rupees and India's economy suffered, not because of any lack of economic productivity. I mean, we forget that the British Empire took trillions of dollars from India. So India was the richest one of the richest countries in the world when the East India Company arrived. It was 25% of the global economy. But it was reduced in part by things like just manipulating the money supply, saying that one should be on the gold standard, and you guys get to have the silver standard, which is almost as good, and we'll let you have that. But in fact, it was kind of a dirty trick. So the truth is, all these tricks, all this manipulation is pretty much legal. And not only legal, we take it for granted. Well, not everybody. Satoshi Nakamoto appears not to have taken it for granted. But the system does reward wrongdoing. There are specific rewards for cheating. And it makes doing the right thing harder. It puts friction in the way. It puts disincentives in the way. It puts cost in the way. So I guess in closing, I'll just say this. A system that incentivizes wrongdoing in one area will incentivize it in all kinds of other areas. You can see that even war and the profitability of it comes from the same forces that Bitcoin is trying to protest against. I said there was one number, the 2x nonviolent revolutions are twice as likely to succeed as violent ones. There's one more number that I'd like to share with you, 3.5%. It used to be a common belief, I think it still is a common belief, that nonviolent revolutions require the majority to finally join in and agree to overthrow the government. But this is far from the case. The same study that showed that nonviolent revolutions are twice as likely to succeed also showed this, that if a revolution can get just 3.5% of the population to actively support it, it will win. When I say it will win, it means that of all the nonviolent revolutions from the beginning of the 20th century till today, any of them that managed to get to this 3.5% support level, all of them won. There's not an exception. They won without fail. So if you're wondering, is a 3.5% support level enough to make you able to take on the 1% and their vested interests? The answer isn't just maybe. The answer from the data is it has happened every time. And we just don't realize how consistently it happens. So I guess I'll conclude with that Bitcoin is part of a tradition, an Indian tradition and a global tradition of being patient, but also being methodical and active and working together. All the elements of Satyagraha are there in the Bitcoin revolution. And so it can help to think of that while trying to make the plans to the next stages of whatever this crypto revolution is.